The teachings of General Conference are the considerations the Lord would have before us now and in the months ahead.
Our marching orders for each 6 months are found in the General Conference addresses.
For the next 6 months, your conference edition of the Ensign should stand next to your standard works and be referred to frequently.
I encourage you to read the talks once again and to ponder the messages contained therein.
I exhort you to study the messages of this conference frequently, even repeatedly, during the next 6 months.
You're listening to the Conference Talk Podcast, where it's conference weekend every weekend. Each weekend, we discuss talks from the most recent General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
That's right. We'll share some insights, make some connections, and have a bit of fun as we study the words of the awesome men and women that God has called to direct His church in the latter days. I'm Tommy May.
And I'm Matthew Watkins. In this episode, Conference Talk Recap. We just finished the October 2025 General Conference. The talks haven't even been published yet. Well, fact check me on that. They'll probably be published by the time we publish this. But wow, what a conference that was, huh?
It was. I don't know if I had a little bit more time that I could pay attention and listen amidst the kids, but it was powerful. There was a lot that I was chasing a little bit. There's a lot I was excited to hear, and great experience.
And of course, everyone was wondering, are we going to have a solemn assembly? Or are they going to set apart President Oaks before the conference? Or are they going to wait till after the funeral? Sounds like waiting till after the funeral this time.
Yep. Yeah. I was hoping that they would do it, but I understand. Now, do you know, I know it's tradition they've done that. They wait till the previous prophet has been buried. Is that just solely a tradition, or is there guidance they received that you know of, or?
My understanding is it is tradition, but it is not a hard and fast rule. And sometime around the time presidency of David O. McKay, they actually had a president pass away before conference, and they did not wait for the funeral before ordaining and setting apart the next president of the church. And that's something interesting I learned. As you remember, when President Nelson was called, several apostles described the experience of meeting in the Salt Lake Temple to reconstitute the first presidency and confer all the keys and privileges and rights of the presidency on President Nelson, which is not something you've heard described all that often. But one of the interesting things several speakers brought up is that it's not just a setting apart, as in, set you apart to a calling, but it's an ordaining and setting apart, which makes it sound almost like president of the church is a priesthood office. I don't know for sure, but they did say ordain and set apart several times explicitly. So presumably, that's what they're going to be doing to President Oaks in their Thursday temple meetings here in just a few hours.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's crazy. And then we'll get a new apostle, a new presidency. And I don't want to speculate, but I'm excited to see. I think what I'm most excited to see is I was just reading some of the comments Oaks made, and he talked about the shift he saw in President Nelson when he was in their first meeting as he was called after he was president of the church and prophet.
This is from his funeral today.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he talked about how there was this shift where instead of being the patient, not that he wasn't patient, but
supportive,
the supportive, like listening and kind of individual, he was quick to make decisions, and Oaks's thought was, he's going to cinch up his belt. This is going to be a fun ride. So I'm excited to see how the Lord uses Oaks in this, as he serves as president of the church. It'll be very fascinating.
Now, President Oaks has a bit of a reputation for not being exactly the funniest or most emotional apostle.
Yeah.
However, the past 48 hours have really shown a new side of him. We watched him get quite emotional during his first address as president of the Quorum of the 12, President Quorum of the 12 and de facto leader of the church during conference, describing the passing of his father in Denver. So I've read President Oaks' biography, and what a touching story that is. His mother, President Oaks' mother, was absolutely convinced her husband would be healed. So he contracted tuberculosis while caring for a patient and took him to a sanatorium in Denver, and he seemed to be on the mend, I guess. And then all of a sudden things just went downhill. And poor President Oaks, poor 7-year-old President Oaks crying at his bedside, and his father coming saying, or his grandfather saying, I will be your father now. Right? And watching our beloved President Oaks get really touched over that. And I don't know that people have seen President Oaks tear up at the pulpit before. And then just a few hours later, presiding at President Nelson's funeral, and he starts cracking jokes. one of the favorite stories I remember from his biography was as a new apostle, President Oaks had been speaking, and he started riffing from the podium a little bit, lifting the mood, making it lighter, cracking some jokes, and the audience was absolutely loving it. And of course, he put in a spiritual message as well. But he sat down and the Spirit said, never do that again. So if President Oaks, he's got maybe the dour apostle reputation. That's why. It's not that he's not a funny man. He's hilarious. And they say that he has a very distinctive way of laughing where his whole body just starts shaking. But in his ministry, he's learned, this is not something for me to play with. This is not something for me to use my good sense of humor on. This is something serious I need to take seriously. And that's why he's a very different person at the pulpit with a very different demeanor than if you sit down and get to know him personally. But we did get a little glimpse of some more of that personality the past few hours. And Rachel's just joining us. Rachel, your instant thoughts on conference.
Mind blowing. One of the most touching conferences that I've ever sat through. The members of the 70 brought their A game.
You're talking about Elder Brown, huh?
Not just Elder Brown, so many of them. But yeah, my son, I talked to my son today. It was Temple Tuesday this week, so their P-Day was today. And for him, it was the 70 that just they kept sharing messages that touched him where he's at in his mission and with what he's doing. For me, of course, Elder Brown lit fire to the world. I have the funny story of I Googled Elder Brown to try to understand a little bit more about who he was. And because Google Gemini doesn't understand the difference between an elder in this quorum or in the quorum of the 12 and an elder in the 70, Google Gemini said he's an apostle. And I thought, how appropriate with what everybody's saying. But all of the 12, my brain is going blank, even though, no, Elder Johnson, the gentleman from Louisiana.
Right.
That's my,
just add some Tonys.
He's my spirit my spirit
kindred spirit
70. I'm like spirit animal, but he's a 70, so spirit 70. I lived in the South for a really long time. My grandmother was a Cajun chef, French Cajun chef, and so I cook a lot of Cajun food, and he just touched and I had multiple friends texting me, "Is that you speaking in conference?" Because I always talk about the recipes. But no, conference was incredible. It's going to take a whole 6 months to go through all those talks and squeeze every bit of wisdom out of it. I loved the 3 talks on the proclamation to the family, the reassertion of it being doctrine.
Elder Razvan knocking it out right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I saw him and I heard what his talk was going to be about. And I'm like, let's go. So excited. Yeah. And then just president of the Quorum of the 12, soon to be probably president of the church. You were talking about, I've met President Oaks. He came to my ward one time, just randomly picked a ward and it happened to be mine. He is a very funny man. He is a very spiritual man. I'm a law nerd, so I absolutely love his legal brain. There's something logical about a legal brain that I just really understand. But the emotion he shared about his father, and I did research to understand. Actually, I think it was your post, Matt. Did you post something?
The clip from his biography talking about the history of his father.
Yeah. Took my breath away, the depth emotion he showed in conference. As a parent and as a mother who was I was raised in a broken home, and my first husband and I split when my children were the same age that my parents split. Same age I was when my parents split. And I got a lot out of President Oaks's talk. That wasn't just go out and get married and have lots of babies, which we all need to do. I'm going to be relying on grandbabies for that because I'm done. But it was also just understanding him as a person a little bit more.
That's awesome. No, it was a great session. As I was listening to conference, I had a couple clear thoughts that really stuck with me. So a lot's happened in the news lately. We had the church at one of our congregations in Michigan was attacked. And then not too long before that, there was the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And then, I mean, there's been a lot building up for the last, I don't know, since the restoration of the church, maybe a little before. But
2025 it's hitting us a little harder than most years.
I think so. I think there's a tipping to violence and more acceptance of violence. And I remember after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I was really kind of rocked by it for a little bit. And I was thinking a little repentant of it, but I was thinking like, Heavenly Father, like, why aren't you having your prophets and apostles speak more on this or do something? And so I was going back through conference talks, and I started to see a pattern as I looked through what's happening now in the conference talks 6 weeks, 5 years ago in that time frame. I saw that he has been. I mean, how often did President Nelson talk about being peacemakers, about resolving conflict, about being kind to others? You know, he talked about that. And then we had Elder Stevenson in this conference talk more about being a peacemaker. And so I realized, number one, these aren't just President Oak's thoughts, Elder Stevenson's thoughts. These are messages from our Heavenly Father, from our Savior, through his ministers. And number two, it's not reactionary, it's preparatory. Yep. The things we're being told today are to prepare us for the next 5-10 years, even the next week, you know? And I'm really excited. The talk in President Oak's talk, a lot of them really stood out. But President Oak's talk, it was really validating. My wife and I always wonder, are we doing things right in our family? Do we have it set up right? Like, we're a little bit different and weird from others around us, but in other ways we're like them, you know? And it was really good validation of, no, we're set up something different. And so I'm excited to counsel with our kids and be like, all right, let's listen to the talk and let's consider what else should we do to grow together as a family based on what President Oaks has said. And I'm really excited to see what comes out of it, as long as they understand having another child is not in the option. We're done with that one. Probably curse myself by saying that, but here we go.
The night before conference, I think it was Saturday night. The days run together, but Saturday night, I've been going through some health issues. I've got chronic anemia, which leaves me exhausted. And during my last treatment, I can't take iron pills. I have to have iron.
Intravenous?
IV. Yeah, intravenous IV or iron. And my last treatment, I was super frustrated because I get a lot of arthritis when I'm having the IV treatment. And I knelt in prayer and I begged God for help because I'm only 44 and I want to be an active grandma one day. I want to be able to go to concerts with my son or go to cons with my other son, convention.
Oh, you're not conning people on the side? That's too bad.
No.
That'd be a fun family business.
Yeah. It's been done. I think I wouldn't be good at it. I'm too nice. But I was praying and asking God for help. I said, whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it. He told me to quit caffeine, which I've now been off caffeine for 5 months. Awesome. Then a couple months ago, he's like, you need to go off soda altogether and sugar. That one's been a little harder. But on Saturday night, I got a prompting that I need to start turning my computer off earlier at night.
What was that quote from conference? Turn off the screen and turn on your family, something like that?
Turn on your family's life or turn on family life. My kids are gone, so it's just my husband and I, but we still need to be. That's even more important because now it's just us. We have to focus on one another. But I got that feeling, and then the next day in President Oaks' talk, he says that exact line. And I was like, all right, there it is. It's
what
like
a confirmation.
Confirmation.
Yeah. Wow.
Right. And along the lines of the peacemaker thing, and also the having a larger family or getting married at all, that's caused some commentary on social media, people talking about the difficulty there is in getting married, how hard that can be to find someone. We all have baggage and we bring our baggage into a marriage. And the thought came to me that getting married is very similar to taking upon you the yoke of Jesus Christ because, we're sealed to each other through Christ. And so when we take that yoke on as a married couple, we are spreading that baggage out among each other, equally among each other with Christ. And it's that sharing of that burden as a married couple. But a lot of the things that people are talking about is how hard it is and how they're trying. One person talked about how they were only able to have 2 children or one child. I only was able to have 2. I wanted 8 or 10. I wanted a big family, and I was able to have 2. And my body gave out. I couldn't do more. And then how hard it is to get married, how hard it is to stay married for some people. Marriage is not easy. Raising children, not easy, especially in the economic and just social environment of the world. And I found a quote by Elder Uchtdorf, from I have the conference, October 2019 conference that I shared today. And it's, remember that discipleship is not about doing things perfectly. It is about doing things intentionally. It is your choices that show what you truly are, far more than your abilities. And I think one of the things we need to remember as we listen to conference, my mom told me that she's going to have nightmares because of all the things she needs to change in her life. She's 82. She'll be 83 this year. And when we have all of this pressure on us to change, and we have all this pressure on us by the Holy Ghost and by the prophets to do better, we need to remember that it's line upon line, precept upon precept, and it's about our intention to do better. It's not about perfection. And so that's one of the things I think it's always important to remember about conference, is that these are all ideals to strive for, not to gain perfection on overnight. I have not turned my computer off before 8 p.m. since Saturday. I am a programmer. I'm always on my computer. It is what it is. And so I have to find a way to change little aspects of my life to make that more possible. And so I'm going to do that gradually, and I'm going to give myself the grace on days when I can't. And that's what we have to do as members of the church, is remember, this isn't about perfection. It's about intention.
And I will second that a little bit. I too sometimes feel the conference overwhelmed. I say, cool, the prophets and apostles have just described the ideal. I'm completely overwhelmed about how to achieve that. And something that I'd recommend to our listeners, if you haven't visited them before, there were 2 gangbuster talks in 2014 that absolutely changed the way that I approach things. So number 1 is Approaching the Throne of God with Confidence by Elder Georg Klebengott. Absolutely wonderful talk. Second talk would be What Lack I Yet by Larry R. Lawrence. And those are one was 2014, the other one might be 2015. You have to check. What Lack I Yet in particular applies to this, where he said, when you are faced with this overwhelm of all the ideals, don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. He said, the Holy Ghost will give you specific counsel about what the most important thing you should focus on now. He said, and it's completely customized to what you want. And it's often not going to be what you think. As I've tried to apply the principles of his talk, I came up with, I like programs. I'm a very formal person. I came up with what I call my personal spiritual priority. So I select an area of focus and I bring it to the Lord. And sometimes I say, hey, I think that I want to work on this. I think this is probably the most pressing thing I need to work on. And sometimes he green lights it and says, yeah, that's great. Go ahead for that. And that'll be my area of focus for a few months. Sometimes I come and I say, okay, I really want to work on this. And he says, you want to work on that because that's the most visible, but that's not the most important, is it? Say, I thought it was most important, but what do you recommend? He said, how about this other area you haven't even thought about? Because that to me is more important for you to work on right now than this other area that is visible and sometimes embarrassing to you. And that kind of personal guidance and direction has changed my interaction with conference. So as I listen to conference in the moments my kids aren't screaming, I remember what they say. Obviously, we study it, we take notes, we compare notes to them on this podcast and in Sunday school classes and everywhere else. But when I hear something that I know is frankly just a little outside my wheelhouse right now, I say that is wonderful counsel. That is true counsel. That is inspired counsel. And I will list that along with 100 other things of inspired counsel that I need to focus on and ask Heavenly Father, what's the most important thing for me to focus on? George McEwen let me know this really interesting piece of etymology that I had not known before. The word priority was an inherently single word, right? It's like the word water. Well, I guess if you're in the Book of Mormon, you have the land of many waters. But usually The word water is singular. You don't have 2 waters, 3 waters, 4 waters. It's just water. And priority is the same way. It means the first thing. And it wasn't until the 1950s or so that we got into our head that you can have priorities, plural. And to the chagrin of everyone working in an office environment, okay, here are 10 priorities. Well, if there's 10 priorities, there's not really a priority. There's no first thing, right? And so I find that with my very limited attention span, I know that I can handle 1, maybe sometimes 2 personal spiritual priorities at a time. But if I try to tackle on more, I may feel ready for it. I'm like, Heavenly Father, let's go. Let's do these 10 different things. I'm going to do my entire life differently. I'm going to start waking up early. I'm going to go to bed early. I'm going to do this with the kids. And Heavenly Father says, I'll see you in 3 days when you burn out. And we'll talk about what's most important.
3 days, that's impressive.
Well, it's
like that.
3 days when I confess that I've burned out. I usually burn out by the next morning.
You admit
yes.
it. Yeah. No, that's great. I love that. I'm going to be listening to What Like I Yet and approaching the throne of God with confidence while I wait for the rest of the conference episodes to come out.
They're timeless talks.
Yeah.
And back to what Rachel said, they're from 70s. They weren't from apostles.
Yeah, a lot of the 70s, I mean, all the talks have been really, really powerful. I'm excited to go through them all. It's going to be fantastic.
I will say one talk that didn't get me excited. The brother who was an accountant say, when I saw the term reconcile in the scriptures, I thought of accounting. I said, oh my gosh, why are you starting your talk this way? Don't do it. Don't do it. Almost as nerdy as Elder Clark Gilbert and his amazing talk, The Parable of the Slope. Because my wife's eyes glazed over. I was all like, this is how I think about the gospel too.
Yeah. No,
These functions and derivatives and slopes and stuff. And my wife's like, we're doing math? We're seriously doing math? I am a tired, burned out new mom. You're doing math right now?
The slope function is what failed me in algebra.
No.
I am not a fan of slope. I remember that talk and just laughing.
But it's such a perfect analogy. I love his parable.
Yeah.
But yes, the moment he said we're gonna do some math, everyone's like, oh no.
I like Elder Bednar's. I thought his talk was great, but he in a question and answer session I saw online in a Spanish speaking visit of his, I'm not sure where it was. But he talks, a young brother asks him, how do you handle all this work? And he says, it's spinning plates. And you look at this plate that's wobbling the most, and that's the one that gets your attentions. And that helped me to put things into, because I felt like for the longest time, I'm like, all right, I'm going to get this squared away. I'm going to do all these things. And so it ended up being this long checklist of every aspect of my life. And I'm like, all right, when I feel like I'm killing it, then I get feedback from one area that like, hey, you're really messing it up, mucking it up over here, bud. And I'm like, but I like the reminder that priority is singular. There should be only one priority at a time. One of my responsibilities at work is to train people on goal setting. So I run the goal setting process for our company. And often when we talk about setting goals, I have to remind them again and again, the fewer, the better. Because if you make a long list of all these goals, either they're very poor goals and it's just, I'm going to take out the trash. Great. It's a very low bar. Or your attention's so divided, you make very little progress on anything. But when we focus on just one or two things, and when those are done, let's say you've accomplished it early, great. Find the next thing. You don't need to know every step. I mean, how often does the Lord tell you the next 5 steps? I mean, we're lucky if we get one step, right?
Well, and to your point with that Elder Bednar Q&A, it's absolutely fantastic. Everyone should go and look it up.
Yeah, it was.
He's very frank about it. He said, look, when you are focusing on your calling, by definition, of necessity, you are not currently building your family. And when you are at home and you're focusing on your family, by necessity, you're not building the ward. You're not serving in your ministering capacity. And when you're at work, you're neither helping the church nor are you helping your family. You can only do one thing at a time, and that's okay. Don't trip. And he says, when you're at work, be at work. Yeah. When you're at home, be at home. And when you're in your calling, be in your calling.
Elder Stevenson visited some of the stakes down in Arizona. My sister-in-law was sharing. He talked about the importance of being where you are when you are. And I think it's that same kind of principle. I think there's power as a bad example, but I am a bad example. There's power in putting all your energy and focus on where you are when you are, being there present I think it makes you a better tool for the Lord, more sensitive to the Spirit and aware of the more nuanced cues you can pick up. Like I think, especially interacts with my kids, like there'll be a little, when you really pay attention, there'll be a little something. You're like, oh, there's something there. Let's dive into that. Let's talk. But if I'm a little bit distracted, if I'm thinking about deadlines or other to-do lists, I'll miss it. I don't have no idea.
Which goes back to President Oaks and his turn off technology and turn on your family life, because how often is it that our phone vibrates because we have a notification and we stop what we're doing at the dinner table in the middle of sacrament? I mean, let's all be honest. We've all done it, where we take our focus away from the here and now and focus on technology. And I'm a big technology person. I wanted to talk about, if you guys remember when President Nelson was first called as an apostle, President Nelson, President Oaks, and President Eyring did a press conference. And it was a phenomenal conference. And one of the questions that was asked, which is a common question that we hear all the time, is when are we going to see a Black apostle or a more diverse quorum of the 12?
I hate that question.
And right, it's a stupid question because the Lord calls who he calls. Who cares, right? I don't. But I loved what President Nelson said. He said, the quorum of the 12 is a very small group of people. And he goes, the leaders of the church are members of the 70 and the individual unit leaders. They're the ones doing the work on the ground in the individual areas. And he goes, in those areas, the leadership of the church is the most diverse leadership you can find. And it's all called by God. And that, to me, goes back to the fact that the 70 members of the 70 gave some of the best talks that we heard in conference. Because while the quorum of the 12 and the first presidency, when it's reformed, are prophets, seers, and revelators, and we sustain them as such, the Holy Ghost speaks to each member of this church with what we need to learn from within our area of responsibility. The 70 are over areas, they're over massive portions of the church, and they receive revelation just as much as everybody else, as the prophet of God. And it's not a matter of who's better or not in the church, because God will speak to us about what we need to do. And these 70 are amazing leaders, just like the General Relief Society Primary and Young Women's Presidency, just like the General Young Men's Presidency. All of the Sunday school, all of these people are just passionate leaders of the church that are taught by the Spirit. And I'm so grateful for all of them. The second talk, I believe she's in the primary presidency. She wore
Sister
the best
Browning.
dress. Let's just all be honest. She is spectacular. I'm disappointed I didn't get to hear from Sister Brunia, who's my absolute favorite person in the church. I swear I adore her. But Sister Browning and her talk on primary music and the effect it has on developing the testimony and how those can hold us through. How many of us have not been thinking the lyrics to I Am a Child of God when you're upset and you need a reset? I don't know about you guys, but it happens to me once a month where I Am a Child of God goes through my head. Or love one another, or families can be together forever. Or Gethsemane, which is the new hotness.
My kids listen to K-pop Demon Hunters all day, so that's usually what's stuck in my head.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
That's good.
I won't subscribe to Netflix after working there. But yeah, that's, I love all of the leaders of our church.
No, I agree. I like that perspective on where the diversity is. And I think the thing people miss about diversity is its power really is in the unity. The diverse background doesn't provide us much value unless we're unified in purpose and goal. That's where the real power comes through. And I think that you see that in those who work in the church. Like, I think it's so interesting. A while ago, I won't go into the details, but there was a time where it was a bit of a struggle for our family to go to church. We just didn't fit with the Lord. And that's fine. That's okay. That happens. And I was talking to someone who wasn't a member of our faith. I brought that up is like, why don't you just go to a different congregation? I'm like, it doesn't really work like that. You kind of assign to the one that's in your geographical location. I mean, you can get an exception, but then you have this whole explanation. Oh, you don't live in our boundaries. Why do you go here? Then you gotta like, well, you know,
my bishop's a jerk.
Yeah, it wasn't that. But so we end up in pretty diverse congregations because of that. And then with that comes some challenges. You know, you've got people, you can't ward shop, you know, at least out here west of the Rockies, you can't ward shop much at all. But I'm sure you have the same thing out there in Utah and Arizona where, I mean, you're in that ward. You just got to adapt to that.
And okay, I don't remember who the speaker was. It was a phenomenal talk. It was talking about ministering, and he was talking about how in Europe or in East Asia or Asia, it was Pakistan. That's right, which is technically a part of Asia, but you get my point. Anyway, how they knew who had a temple recommend. They knew why those who didn't. They had a list. It was at 98%.
I love that talk.
Or they knew who. It was a phenomenal talk. I mean, that was a smackdown on us for not doing our ministering, right? I am terrible at ministering. I'm good at ministering online, terrible about doing it in person. But the thing that I got out of that talk specifically, and something that I've had in my own experience when I was in a Relief Society presidency, is ministering is not just to see how they're doing. We're supposed to take that information, and if something needs to go to the bishop, that's why we have ministering check-ins with our Quorum or Relief Society leaders, because we can say, hey, Jill is having a really hard time and she probably needs some extra help. My son's girlfriend's family is going through a really tough time. My son's girlfriend's 20 years old, and she is taking on the burden of taking care of her father, taking care of her grandparents, helping with her siblings because there's not a mother who's doing her motherly things and all of this. And she has no help. And I said, well, have you talked to your bishop? She goes, because of some experience of certain circumstances, I haven't been able to go to church. I don't even know who my bishop is. I said, give me your address. I will have his phone number for you by the end of the night, and we will get you help, because that's what ministering is for, right? A 20-year-old should not be taking on these intense issues. And that's what ministering is supposed to do. It's not just checking in. It's just not just fellowship, although that's a major part of it. Let me know if we can
take out your trash.
It is allowing us to report back in this holy order of God that we see throughout his church, right? And if we're not doing that and we're not reporting back, and this is me who has to do it better, line upon line here, I'm guilty of this. We're not able to report back and make sure the links are all connected. And bishops are responsible. Their mantle of responsibility is for everybody, member or not, within their ward boundary. They are responsible for the people who are not members to make sure that they're fed, that if their family is struggling. And there's a level of that they have to keep in their mind. And so we really need to be doing our ministering. That's all I got to say about that talk. That talk was amazing.
What touched me about that talk was they didn't just know, oh, here's 7 people that need their temple recommends renewed. They knew the names. They knew the situations. One of my pet peeves is I sit through too many ward councils where we spend the entire time calendaring. Meanwhile, there's a new convert who hasn't been to church the past 3 weeks, but we're not talking about him. We're spending all the time with the Relief Society talking about the next ward activity. And that drives me absolutely nuts, because I'm used to the mission way of doing it, where you have a list of investigators and you have a list of less activists, and every night you are praying for them, and every night you are planning what you are going to teach them, and you are trying to discern their needs, and you're trying to help them. I don't think it's that big of an ask to say, hey, maybe in ward council, what if you turn that on its head, follow the example in this talk, and say, let's talk names. Bishop starts it out. I've been worried about Sister Brown. After her husband gave that amazing conference address, their house is just flooded with fan mail. I think they could use a little break, right? So mention the names of people and say, who's going to reach out to them? Who is best equipped to help them? Let's mobilize the ward council to mobilize ministers to go out and do this. And by the way, this is not something that's just on the bishop's shoulders. I know that for decades, the poor bishops who've been working 40 hours a week as bishops, in addition to their full-time jobs, have been doing this. The prophet and the apostles are trying to get us away from that and say, you have an elders quorum president. You have a Relief Society president. Well, the Relief Society president, she's already doing 60 hours a week, but you have an elders quorum president. Let him start taking on some of that responsibility. And some bishops are loath to let that go because they're scared of letting go of that and not knowing what that elders quorum president's going to do with it. Let him run, let him cook, talk about names, focus on the spiritual, let the calendaring be an email, please. Maybe I'll get on my soapbox when we talk about that talk.
I'm going to get you a soapbox.
Real quick, I just want to point out that we have in the church tools, we have what is it called? The path.
Covenant
path. Covenant. The covenant path that it shows where, according to ordinance, where everyone is, and that should be reviewed regularly.
But who's filling that out?
By members of the
missionaries. Are the missionaries in ward council?
Missionaries.
Are the ward council looking at that tool? No, they are not.
And that's what needs to change. My son, who's on his mission, he said the most brilliant thing to me. He's an amazing missionary. Shout out to the Missouri St. Louis mission. But he said to me, he goes, it is our job to find them and teach them and prepare them for baptism. It is the ward's job to minister them and keep them. And if we are not doing that, we are not fulfilling the mission of the church.
Well, we've all been warned. Let's all get to work on it, huh?
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to the next 6 months of these podcast episodes and of really getting down and deep into conference this last session. It was phenomenal. We've got a whole lot of changes coming with the new first presidency and the new quorum of the 12 member. So let's, take our vitamins. Right. We need them.
No, very true. Very true. I'm excited. It's going to be fun. Any last thoughts? We'll go around the room. Final thought you want to leave with the audience, Rachel?
Attend the temple. If you're not temple worthy, get temple worthy. If you don't have a temple recommend, get your temple recommend. It is more important than ever that we are reading our scriptures, saying our prayers, going to church, taking the sacrament, and attending the temple.
I like that. Matthew?
I would like to give our listeners a little life hack here. I listen to a lot of podcasts. KSL has a general conference podcast where each session is an episode of the podcast. So 4 episodes are just released. I guess 5. That to me seems to work better than listening to conference in the app because it saves my place where I am. I can change the silent skipping and the speed and all the bells and whistles. And most importantly, I get to hear the music again. There is something special when you listen to conference and you hear the hymns. Some of my most powerful spiritual experiences have been listening to conference, driving on the way to and from work in the past, listening not just to the talks, but to the hymns in between. And those carry as much of the Spirit when you're alone by yourself as the talks do. So as we study the talks, don't miss out on the hymns.
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna check that out. I had a thought in the Joe Smith translation of, I think it's in Matthew. We've heard the scripture that in the last days, even the very elect might be deceived. And in the Joe Smith translation, one of the things the Lord clarified through Joe Smith was that the way we avoid being deceived is by treasuring up his word. And so my invitation or my hope is to treasure up the words of the Lord from conference and the scriptures regularly so that I can, numb my pride and recognize the promptings of the Spirit and avoid being deceived. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thanks for listening to the Conference Talk podcast. This episode, we discussed the conference recap, which is great to hit some of our favorite talks, what stood out to us. And over the next several weeks, we'll be releasing an episode on many of the talks.
Going to be super exciting. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a 5-star rating anywhere you find podcasts.
And check out our website, conferencetalk.org, where you can follow us on social media, drop a comment, check out the show notes, and learn more about us, your hosts.
If you want to follow me, Matthew Watkins, you can find me at powerinthebook.com or on X. My handle is A True Millennial, based off of President Nelson's talk.
Rachel, you want to tell where the audience can find you?
Right now, I'm just on X under Rach_the_riveter. I'm very easy to find there. I'm very verbose.
Verbose. I love it. And if you want to find me, you can find me on X as well. My handle is @DowdyTommy. Yeah, I'd love to interact with you.
But while we always appreciate new followers, it's better to follow the prophet and apostles themselves. I guess you can't really follow the prophet right now, but in a few days you will. When we have a prophet, you better follow him.
I know I sustained him already, and I'm not even 100% sure. I'm 99.9% sure who he is.
Yep. We love speaking about the church and our leaders, but we do not speak for them. Everything said on this podcast represents our own personal opinions.
So join us next time for some good old personal opinions in making every weekend conference weekend on the Conference Talk podcast.